6 years into my marriage with Diana, I thought I'd found the perfect balance. A modest home, a thriving small construction business, and a loving wife who supported me through thick and thin. But little did I know, her family, especially her older sister Michaela, had other plans for me. To them, I wasn't just a brother-in-law. I was their personal ATM, always expected to cough up cash without question or complaint. At first, it seemed harmless enough, a few $100 here for an emergency car repair, another grand there because Carl supposedly lost his job. Each time, Michaela would spin some tear-jerking tale that tugged at your heartstrings. One night, she called me in hysterics, claiming Carl had been in a horrific car accident and needed immediate medical attention. Without hesitation, I wired over $5,000. Imagine my fury when, days later, I scrolled through Instagram only to find Carl casually gaming on his PS5 at home during the exact hour of the so-called accident. That's when I realized this wasn't about emergencies, it was about entitlement. Michaela didn't stop at draining my wallet. She made sure to chip away at my dignity too. Every refusal to hand over money came with biting remarks like, "A real man provides," or "Guess we can't count on you after all." Her guilt trips became relentless, painting me as selfish while she flaunted her designer bags and luxury vacations online, all funded by my hard-earned cash. The worst part, Diana kept defending her sister, saying things like, "That's just how Michaela is," or "Family helps family." Meanwhile, our once stable life felt more like a sinking ship, weighed down by Michaela's greed. The storm finally broke during one of those infamous weekly family dinners at Violet's house. The air was thick with tension from the moment we walked in, though I tried to ignore it and focus on my plate. Michaela, however, had other plans. She began her performance with a rehearsed smile that didn't reach her eyes, a smile I'd come to recognize as the precursor to another cash grab. "So, Miles," she said sweetly, leaning forward like she was about to share some profound wisdom, "when can you transfer the money for our vacation? The deposit's due next week." Her tone was casual, but her words hit the table like a grenade. I nearly choked on my drink. "What money?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the rising heat in my chest. "For the vacation, silly," she giggled, waving her hand dismissively. "I found this amazing deal, only $2,800 per couple. That's nothing for you, right? You're always talking about how well your business is doing." Her audacity left me speechless. I glanced around the table, searching for support or at least sanity, but everyone seemed to be waiting for my response. Diana stared at her plate, her fork hovering midair, clearly uncomfortable. Violet dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, already preparing for the drama ahead. Even Carl, who rarely spoke, avoided eye contact, his jaw clenched tightly. "I wasn't consulted about this vacation," I replied firmly, setting my glass down with deliberate care. "And I'm not paying for it." The room froze. For a moment, there was only silence, broken by the faint clinking of silverware against plates. Then Michaela's mask slipped. Her face twisted into an ugly mix of shock and anger, her perfectly manicured nails gripping the edge of the table. "What do you mean, you're not paying?" she spat, her voice rising. "We already told the kids. You can't back out now." She turned to Diana, her expression softening into fake concern. "Tell your husband to stop being so difficult, Diana. Family helps family, that's what real men do." Violet, ever the drama queen, burst into theatrical tears. "How could you, Miles?" she sobbed, shaking her head dramatically. "We trusted you with our daughter. Is this how you repay us? What kind of man refuses to help his own family?" Lila, the youngest sister, chimed in with a sharpness that surprised even me. "Maybe he just doesn't know how to be a good husband or father," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "A man who loves his family would never say no to something like this." The accusations came fast and furious, each word designed to cut deeper than the last. But what struck me most wasn't their words, it was their body language. Michaela leaned back in her chair, smirking triumphantly as if she'd already won. Violet kept stealing glances at Diana, silently urging her to take sides. Lila crossed her arms defiantly, her lips curled into a sneer. And Carl. Poor Carl sat there like a ghost, his presence barely registering. When Michaela stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, the tension reached its breaking point. She pointed a finger straight at me, her voice shrill and accusatory. "You don't deserve Diana," she screamed, her mascara starting to smudge under the weight of her emotions. "You're selfish, cruel, and heartless. How dare you treat us like this after everything we've done for you?" Her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It was then that I realized they weren't just trying to guilt me into paying. They were using the entire family as leverage, turning what should have been a simple refusal into a full-blown character assassination. The morning after the disastrous family dinner, I woke up to an inbox flooded with notifications. At first, I thought it was just the usual slew of passive-aggressive messages from Michaela, but as I scrolled through my phone, my blood ran cold. Michaela had created a private family group chat excluding me, of course, and was spinning an elaborate narrative that painted me as the villain. Worse still, she'd taken her grievances public, posting cryptic updates on Facebook with hashtags like #RealMenProvide and attaching photoshopped images of me looking menacing. One message stood out: "Diana can't even buy coffee without asking permission," Michaela wrote, followed by screenshots of fabricated text conversations where she claimed I monitored every penny Diana spent. The comments section was a feeding frenzy of judgmental relatives and acquaintances, all chiming in with phrases like, "I always knew something was off about him," or "You need to protect yourself, Diana." It wasn't just gossip, it was a coordinated attack designed to isolate Diana from me and turn the entire family against me. What hit hardest was seeing how deeply this affected Diana. She came home from work visibly shaken, clutching her phone. A colleague had forwarded her one of Michaela's posts, asking if everything was okay at home. Apparently, rumors were spreading that I was financially abusive, controlling every aspect of Diana's life. Her principal even pulled her aside for a casual check-in, implying that they might have to report me to HR if things escalated. The weight of these accusations crushed her spirit. For days, she barely spoke, retreating into herself as she wrestled with conflicting emotions. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked one evening, tears streaming down her face. "Tell you what? That your sister has been lying to everyone including you for years," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I didn't want to drag you into this mess, but clearly, they've already done that themselves." Her struggle was palpable. On one hand, she wanted to believe me. On the other, decades of loyalty to her family made it hard for her to accept the truth. Every time she tried to defend me, Michaela would swoop in with more lies, claiming I'd turned her against them. The guilt ate away at Diana, manifesting in sleepless nights and quiet sobs in the bathroom. Meanwhile, Carl, who had always been a silent bystander, began to crack under the pressure. He initially dismissed my accusations about Michaela's spending habits, but when he discovered $10,000 worth of designer bags charged to their joint credit card, reality finally sank in. He called me late one night, his voice trembling with anger and shame. "Miles, is this true? Did she really spend our money on this?" he asked, sending over screenshots of the transactions. "Yes," I said bluntly. "And that's not all. Remember the so-called emergency roof repair 6 months ago? Turns out, it went toward her spa weekend in Miami." There was a long pause before Carl spoke again. "I feel like such an idiot. All these years, I thought she was being honest with me. How could I have missed this?" His confession marked a turning point. For the first time, someone else in the family acknowledged Michaela's manipulation. But instead of confronting her directly, Carl distanced himself, moving out temporarily to stay with his brother. His absence left a void in the household dynamic, further destabilizing Michaela's carefully constructed facade. As the days passed, the fallout intensified. Relatives bombarded Diana with messages, urging her to see reason and stand by her family. Even Violet joined the fray, calling daily to remind Diana of her duties as a wife and daughter. Each call chipped away at her resolve, leaving her torn between defending me and appeasing her family. One particularly heated conversation ended with Diana shouting, "Stop telling me what to do. You're the ones who pushed Miles to his breaking point." She hung up, trembling, and collapsed onto the couch. "I don't know what to do anymore," she whispered, burying her face in her hands. "You don't have to choose sides," I told her gently, "but you deserve to know the truth. If your family can't respect that, then maybe it's time to set boundaries." It wasn't easy for her to hear, but deep down, I knew she agreed. Slowly, she began gathering evidence: bank statements, receipts, and screenshots to counter Michaela's lies. When she posted them in the family chat, the reaction was explosive. Some relatives accused her of betraying the family, while others reluctantly admitted they'd suspected Michaela's dishonesty all along. The tension reached its peak when Michaela showed up unannounced at our house, mascara streaked down her face, screaming about how I'd ruined her reputation. Diana, armed with irrefutable proof, calmly pointed to our Ring camera. "You're doing that yourself right now," she said, her voice icy. Michaela tried to force her way in, but I intervened, dialing the non-emergency police line. As the officer arrived and reiterated trespassing laws, Michaela broke down sobbing, accusing us of destroying her family. Yet, watching her meltdown only reinforced what we already knew. The cracks in her perfect image were finally showing. The family meeting was supposed to be a chance for reconciliation, or at least that's what Violet had promised. But the moment we stepped into her house, I could feel the air crackling with tension. Michaela sat on the couch like she owned the place, legs crossed and lips pursed in what I assumed was meant to look dignified but came off as smug. Carl, her husband, sat stiffly beside her, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Lila fidgeted nervously, while Violet hovered nearby, ready to play mediator or manipulator, depending on how things unfolded. Finally, Michaela began, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "We can clear up this ridiculous misunderstanding." She turned to me, her eyes narrowing. "Miles, you've caused so much pain by refusing to help your family. A real man provides without question." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I pulled out my phone, opened my notes app, and started reading aloud. March 2022, $3,000 for Carl's medical emergency. Funny thing, Carl posted pictures from Atlantic City that same weekend. December 2022, $5,000 for urgent roof repairs. Except there was no roof repair. You bought a hot tub instead. The room fell silent. Every word hung in the air like a guillotine blade waiting to drop. Michaela's face twisted into an ugly mask of rage and disbelief. "How dare you keep score like that? That's not what family does," she shrieked, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "Oh, it absolutely is what family does when someone keeps taking without giving back," I shot back, my voice calm but firm. "Over 6 years, you've borrowed over $43,000 from me and not a single penny has been repaid. Let's talk about some of those emergencies next, shall we?" That's when Michaela played her trump card, or so she thought. With dramatic flair, she clutched her chest, let out a gasp, and collapsed onto the floor. The room erupted into chaos. Violet rushed to her side, sobbing hysterically, while Lila screamed for someone to call 911. Even Carl looked genuinely alarmed, though he remained frozen in place. But here's the thing, I'd anticipated this move. Before arriving, I'd sensed our home security system to my phone. As Michaela lay sprawled on the carpet, moaning theatrically, I casually opened the live feed from our Ring camera. Sure enough, just minutes before her collapse, she'd been texting furiously, laughing at memes on Instagram. I turned the screen toward the group. "She doesn't look very unconscious to me," I said dryly. Michaela bolted upright, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment and fury. "You're twisting everything. You're trying to destroy us." "No, Michaela," I replied coolly. "You're doing a fine job of destroying yourself. And speaking of destruction," I scrolled through my gallery until I found the photo I'd been waiting to unveil, a screenshot of Michaela posing gleefully beside a brand new luxury car on Instagram, captioned, "When life gives you lemons, drive them." "This," I said, holding up the image for everyone to see, "was purchased 2 months ago. Care to explain how you afforded it after claiming you couldn't pay your mortgage?" The room went dead silent again. All eyes shifted to Carl, whose expression morphed from confusion to devastation. He stared at Michaela, his hands trembling as he processed the implications. "You told me we were broke," he whispered hoarsely. "You said we couldn't afford groceries last month." His voice rose steadily, shaking with barely contained fury. "And now I find out you spent $80,000 on a car. How could you do this to us?" For the first time in years, Carl found his voice, and it was loud, raw, and unrelenting. Tears streamed down his face as he stood up, towering over Michaela. "All these years, I thought you were being honest with me. I worked overtime, skipped vacations, sacrificed everything to support our family. And all along, you were lying to my face." Michaela tried to defend herself, stammering excuses about how the car was a business investment and how she'd planned to sell it later. But Carl wasn't buying it. He grabbed his jacket and stormed toward the door, pausing only to throw one last glance at the woman he'd once trusted completely. "I'll send movers for my stuff tomorrow," he muttered before slamming the door behind him. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Lila burst into tears, wailing about how her dream wedding was ruined because Michaela had promised to cover half the costs with the money she expected me to provide. Violet, desperate to regain control, hurled a glass of water straight at me, screaming accusations about how I was tearing the family apart. Diana stepped in front of me protectively, her voice steady despite the storm raging around us. Enough, Mom. This isn't Miles' fault, it's yours. For years, you've enabled Michaela's lies and manipulation. Well, not anymore. Violet recoiled as if slapped, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Meanwhile, Michaela continued her tirade, accusing me of ruining her reputation and poisoning Diana against her. But no one was listening anymore. The cracks in her carefully constructed facade had widened into chasms, exposing the truth for all to see. By the end of the night, alliances had shifted entirely. Lila distanced herself from Michaela, quietly apologizing to me for believing her lies. Violet retreated into sullen silence, unable to deny the evidence stacked against her eldest daughter. And Diana. She stood firmly by my side, her resolve stronger than ever. As we drove home, she reached for my hand. "Thank you," she said softly, "for standing up to them and for helping me see the truth." The unraveling of Michaela's perfect facade was as swift as it was brutal. It started with a single email forwarded to her HR department, a collection of Instagram posts showing her lounging on Maldives beaches during days she'd claimed were sick leave. The photos were damning, each caption dripping with luxury, while her colleagues back in the office struggled through actual workdays. Within hours, Michaela was summoned to an emergency meeting with HR. By the end of the day, she was handed a termination letter and escorted out of the building, her designer handbag slung over one shoulder like a relic from another life. But losing her job was just the beginning. Back at home, the power company finally cut off their electricity after months of unpaid bills. The house plunged into darkness, illuminated only by flickering candles and the faint glow of Carl's phone screen as he scrolled through credit card statements late into the night. Their once-stocked refrigerator now stood empty, its shelves barren except for a few condiment bottles long past their expiration dates. They relied on food donations from the local pantry, the humiliation compounding with every trip to pick up boxes of canned goods and stale bread. Lila, who had dreamed of a fairy tale wedding complete with floral arches and champagne toasts, found herself canceling her venue reservation when Michaela admitted she couldn't cover her promised share money she'd assured everyone would come from Miles. Instead, Lila tearfully announced that the wedding would take place in their backyard, decorated with whatever they could borrow or scavenge. When Michaela tried to console her, Lila snapped, "This is all your fault. You ruined everything," before storming off, leaving Michaela sitting alone in the dim candlelight, mascara streaking down her face. Carl, unable to stomach the lies any longer, packed a duffel bag and left without a word. His departure hit Michaela hardest. The man who had silently endured her manipulations for years was now gone, leaving behind only silence and an echoing emptiness in their hollowed-out home. Violet, desperate to salvage what remained of her family's dignity, pleaded with Diana to intervene, but even she couldn't deny the wreckage caused by Michaela's greed. Diana's transformation was both gradual and profound. At first, she wrestled with guilt, torn between loyalty to her family and the undeniable truth Miles had laid bare. But the tipping point came when she discovered Michaela hadn't just exploited them, she'd also borrowed money from Diana's closest friends, using their relationship as leverage for her scams. She told Sarah you needed emergency surgery, one friend texted, and that I should help because you were too proud to ask. The betrayal cut deep, forcing Diana to confront the extent of her sister's manipulation. "I'm so sorry I doubted you," Diana said one night, clutching Miles' hand. "I let my family blind me, but not anymore." Her voice hardened with resolve. "We're done being their victims." The rift within the extended family grew wider. While Violet stubbornly defended Michaela, others began to see through her lies. Uncle Jim, once her staunchest supporter, publicly declared during a family gathering, "I've been wrong about her all these years. She's been pulling our strings like puppets." His words ignited a firestorm, with relatives divided, some clinging to denial, others finally acknowledging the damage Michaela had caused. In a final act of desperation, Michaela stormed to our house late one night, pounding on the door and screaming like a banshee. "You've ruined everything," she shrieked, threatening to harm herself if we didn't give her money. When Diana calmly told her the camera was recording, Michaela tried forcing her way in, shoving past us in a frenzy. That's when I called the police. The officer arrived quickly, issuing a formal warning. Any further attempts to contact us would result in trespassing charges. Meanwhile, Carl had reached his breaking point. He filed for legal separation and hired a lawyer to untangle their financial mess, 3 maxed-out credit cards and mounting debt, all thanks to Michaela's reckless spending. Her lies had finally caught up with her, leaving their family in ruins. They sold their house to cover debts and moved into a cramped, run-down apartment. Violet, once quick to blame me, now faced the harsh truth. Michaela's greed had destroyed them all. Amid the chaos, Diana and I found peace. We planned a small getaway with her Aunt Margaret, the only person who'd warned us about Michaela years ago. As we drove to the cabin, Diana smiled for the first time in months. Sometimes, she said, the best revenge is just letting people face the consequences of their actions. The story's greatest lesson is this: kindness, when exploited, can lead to devastating consequences. Miles' decision to document every transaction wasn't just about protecting himself, it was a lifeline for others to see the truth. Michaela's downfall wasn't merely her greed, it was karma delivering justice. Those she deceived eventually sided with Miles, realizing they'd been pawns in her game. In the end, Miles and Diana's trip with Aunt Margaret symbolized renewal, a fresh start free from manipulation. The message is clear: don't let your generosity be weaponized. Stand firm, protect yourself, and trust that sometimes the best revenge is letting reality hit back.